Is this on? Oh, yes, it is definitely on. So while I will soon have the opportunity to speak to our esteemed scholar in residence, first I just wanted to thank Roz and to thank Abner. May his memory be for a blessing. The two of you have brought to our community for so many years esteemed scholarship, dedication to learning, the opportunity to connect with each other, all ages, with various facets, exploring the soul, and exploring the heart, and exploring the mind. And so on behalf of Sinai Temple, we are deeply grateful. Thank you. And I have the opportunity to introduce the person who is introducing our scholar in residence, and that person is none other than Nadav Brandis. Now, you can wave, yeah, I like that. When I was thinking about what I wanted to say about Nadav, last night I wasn't in this room, I wasn't in Cone Chapel because I was teaching the Introduction to Judaism class. And for the Introduction to Judaism class, you start off with an icebreaker, and the icebreaker is, let's define a mensch. Well, that's a really fun icebreaker to do. How would you define a mensch? What are some of the words that you would use? Kind. What else? Helpful. Charitable. What did you say? Righteous. Genuine. Decent. Modest. Thoughtful. A real human being. A real human being. Well, I felt like one term was missing from that list, and that term or phrase or name is Nadav Brandis. He is a true mensch, a Nazarian fellow, a Barron scholar, someone who leads within our teen community, but also someone who leads in which any age, each of us, we follow you, Nadav, and we follow your example. And so we are so blessed to have you in our community, and so I'd like to call you forward to help introduce our scholar in residence.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be a little bit redundant of what she said, but just to introduce myself. First, welcome to this year's Scholar in Residence lecture series. My name is Nadav Brandis, and I've been a part of the Sinai Temple community basically my whole life. I attended Sinai Akiba Academy from preschool all the way until 8th grade, where I laid the foundation for my Jewish identity. As I began secular high school, I continued my involvement with the temple, first as a Nazarian fellow in 9th grade and now as a Barron scholar. I'm also the social action chair of the Teen Center Board, where I help coordinate events, bring Jewish teens together, and help make an impact on the outside world. Tonight, we'll have the honor of hearing from Dr. David Zvi Kalman, a Jewish scholar whose work explores the intersections of technology, religion, and culture. When I was asked to introduce him in front of our congregation by Rebecca Small, I was both honored and excited. I got to have an incredibly meaningful conversation with David Zvi over the phone and learned of the groundbreaking work he's doing to shed light on an overlooked topic. As many of us know by now, artificial intelligence's popularity has surged in recent years, permeating our everyday lives and reshaping the way we work, learn, and communicate. While this technology has been widely used as a tool for good, driving significant advancements in healthcare, environmental sustainability, and social issues, artificial intelligence, or AI, also poses many detrimental threats to the human race. It has enabled large-scale misinformation, threatened job displacement, inhibited critical thinking, and caused environmental harm. While the pros and cons of AI have largely been explored, its intersections with religion, culture, and human dignity have been largely overshadowed, forcing us to redefine our moral frameworks in a rapidly changing world. Dr. David Zvi Kalman, a renowned scholar of Judaism technology who we'll hear from tonight, has dedicated his work to exploring these intersections, standing at the forefront of conversations integral to both Jewish and secular thought. Originally, while at the University of Pennsylvania, David Zvi sought to become an expert in medieval and Jewish Islamic law. However, as technology became more and more prevalent in everyday conversation, it was clear to him that this profound force needed to be addressed. Today, in addition to being a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute, a leading center of Jewish thought and education, he hosts his own podcast on religion and technology, is a program organizer at Sinai and Synapsis, and is the owner of Printocraft Press, a publishing house dedicated to innovative Jewish literature. Through these different roles, David has pushed important and overlooked topics into the center of Jewish conversation, reflecting a broader effort to help adapt Judaism creatively to an innovative, accelerating society. Today, Dr. Kalman actively researches the efforts of organizations and leaders to improve Jewish education through up-and-coming AI platforms. He also has dived deeply into what it means to view AI as a human, exploring the controversies, mixed reactions, and involvement in the world of film. As artificial intelligence continues to flourish, the issues and ethical questions it raises will only heighten. Through his work, Dr. David Zvi Kalman will ensure that Jewish thought remains active in these conversations, reminding us that amidst rapid innovation, Jewish values will remain at our core. Tonight, specifically, we'll hear him speak on the intersections of AI, Judaism, and human dignity, exploring what these developments mean for humanity. So with great pleasure, Dr. David Zvi Kalman.
Really an honor to be speaking to you again tonight. Can y'all hear me? Louder? A little bit louder? Okay. All right, let's try it now. Okay. So tonight we're talking about AI. We're always talking about AI, but tonight we're really talking about AI. And I first want to start by framing where AI sits in larger conversations around other technologies, because there are ways in which AI is actually not that different from other technologies that we've encountered before. If you think about technologies that create bias, well, there's other technologies that have created bias in the past. If you think about technologies that pose national security risks, there are other technologies that do that too. If you think about technologies that change the shape of public discourse, there's other technologies that change the shape of public discourse. So in some ways, AI is not that different. And there's lots of ways of talking about AI as kind of being in the same model, maybe taking things to the nth degree, but not actually being that different. But one thing that AI is different in is that AI is very fast. The speed of AI is perhaps its defining characteristic. AI is perhaps the fastest moving technology that we've ever encountered as a civilization. And not just that, but AI, because it's a software technology, the distance between a theoretical breakthrough in AI and something that you can hold in your hand, something that you can actually use, that can take place in a matter of weeks. Right? That's not true for biotechnology, that's not true for automotive technology, that's not true for almost any other technology. Things are moving incredibly fast, and things are moving faster and faster. The pace of change is itself accelerating. You could pick any headline you want. I've just given you a couple that are quite recent. One, there was kind of a viral blog post some of you may have seen by Matt Schumer, which if you want to kind of get a sense of the zeitgeist, I encourage you to take a look at this. Something big is happening, which I think kind of captures it. And then this podcast, or Dario Amodei, who's like a leading AI developer, basically saying like we are nearing the end of the exponential. That is to say, like we are reaching a kind of point of no return around AI. So things are moving very fast. The speed itself is becoming kind of a problem. It's becoming a problem because human society cannot move as fast as the technology itself moves. We as a species can only react so quickly to the technologies that come into our lives. And many people have remarked that even if the pace of change for even if the pace of change for AI stopped tomorrow, meaning even if everyone at OpenAI, at Anthropic, at every AI company, even if they stopped doing what they're doing today, and we only had the technologies they'd already developed, it would still take a decade plus for all of the ideas, all of the powers that we have accumulated over the past few years to become fully integrated and digested into our society. So we are just playing catch up. That is a hard thing to do, and I think it's especially hard for folks who are coming from religious communities. It's hard because it is often the stance of religious communities to say, let's wait, let's not respond to a technology until it becomes commercially viable, until it becomes commercially available, because, responding to a technology takes time. And why spend your time responding to something that may in fact never come to be, that may in fact never materialize? So, we often adopt an approach that's kind of like this. You see a threat out the window, you say, I'm going to wait till that threat is actually real, and then I'll respond to it, right? Let's wait to see if that becomes a problem, even though you can kind of see it in the distance. And you can think about this not just with AI, but other kinds of technologies as well. To give you an example, one of the other technologies that's kind of on the horizon right now is the ability to edit the human genome, to kind of create designer babies. That's a technology which kind of exists, right? There have been, babies that are born with their genomes edited in advance. It's not widely available, but it may become available in the next decade or so. So for a technology like that, it's worth thinking about how do you respond to it now before it becomes commercially available, because by the time it becomes commercially available, often the ability to say something that changes public policy or affects the way the public thinks about it is radically reduced. That is a different way of thinking about how to approach a technology that we've had to deal with in the past. It's kind of needing to adopt some of the language of science fiction into an ethical response, to say, let's look into the future, see the possible futures, and provide responses to those things, as opposed to just kind of being in reaction mode over and over and over again. But we're not quite there yet. Now, with AI in particular, I want to really talk about one specific ethical problem that I think we are encountering. And it's a large problem, it's a philosophical problem. It's not just the problem of, is AI going to take our jobs, or is AI safe around kids? It's, what does AI represent in relationship to humanity? And this is an important problem to address because AI, I think for many people, isn't just any other technology. There's something in it that feels religious, or that feels spiritually important. And that's a sentiment, interestingly, that you see not just among folks who come from religious backgrounds, but folks in the tech sector themselves, right? You can talk about people like Peter Thiel at Palantir saying that if you are opposed to AI regulation, if you are pro-AI regulation, if you want to regulate AI, then you are literally the Antichrist, right? Using the language of religion to say, do not ever regulate AI, that is dangerous. Or people in Silicon Valley talking about building God as a metaphor for thinking about AI. So there's a way in which this technology has a kind of religious overtones, undertones, and that's a part and parcel of it. So the way that I think about this, the term that I find useful is AI has a problem of resemblance to us. AI resembles us. Now, the resemblance between human beings and AI can be kind of passed off as an accident or as a coincidence. I think often when we first encounter it, it is convenient for us, it is simpler for us to say, this doesn't really mean much, it happens to be that way, but let's try to pretend it doesn't exist. But I want to argue that there's actually something there that really can't be ignored. And the reason it can't be ignored is because the resemblance between human beings and AI is integral to AI itself. It's integral in a couple of ways. First, it's integral in the way that AI is developed. If you think about what it means to train an AI model, ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other major AI models available today, the reason that they are so good is because they have been trained on our data, on all the text on the internet, on all the images that you can get your hands on, and all the videos you can find, basically on all of human output that is available, right? Digging up all the books from every library, bringing that into the system. So to the extent that AI resembles us, it's because it is trained on us. The resemblance is there because we made it there. And when we test to see if an AI is good at its job, when we create metrics for is this AI model particularly good, we often judge it according to the metrics of, does it do what a human would do? Does it act the way we would expect a human to act? And is it ethical? Is it moral in the way that we want human beings to be ethical and we want human beings to be moral? So there are lots of ways in which the AI products that we see are the end result of an intense effort to force a resemblance between human beings and AI. There is also a resemblance because AI models that we like, the models that we enjoy using, are often models that are designed intentionally to seem like human beings or to replicate human labor, right? ChatGPT was not the first model that OpenAI released. There was a model called GPT-3 before that. It was not a chatbot. It was not designed to seem like you were interacting with another being, and it was not as successful. There is something about framing AI as a kind of conversational partner that people appreciate, using the metaphors that you would use around human beings, imagining AIs as agents, right? The way you could talk about a human being as being an agent, that matters. So the resemblance between human beings and AI is part and parcel of what it means to have an AI system. It is not incidental, it's not accidental, it's not going to go away. And so when we think about what does it mean that human beings and AI resemble each other, we can't just pass it off as being trivial, we have to treat it head on. And that is uncomfortable because I think a lot of us instinctively want to say, but people are special. So the resemblance can't mean anything, right? But I think we actually need to take this seriously in ways that, and kind of explore the different issues. So I want us to explore together what we might make of this resemblance and what Judaism has to say about it in particular. So how might we think about this resemblance? Well, there's one school of thought that says, listen, AI is just part of a larger story that we tell about human civilization. There's a philosopher, Peter Singer. There's a philosopher, Peter Singer, who decades ago developed this idea of an expanding moral circle. It used to be that human beings only cared about the people close to them. The people you value are just your family or your community or the people who are the same color as you. And over time, we have learned as a species to value all of humanity. And so the theory goes, and some philosophers, put this forward, that the next step in human moral development is to include AIs in that circle too, right? We are going to include more and more things in that circle, just like there are other kinds of beings that we are now thinking about as also being part of that moral circle. Just, to kind of play this out, what are some other entities that we are now thinking about as maybe we should treat them more like people, or maybe we should give them personhood beyond AI? What are some other examples of that we see today? Animals, right? Right? So there's a whole conversation around, should you treat animals? Should you give animals some kind of personhood, right? Some of you may know there was a case a few years ago, Happy the Elephant in the Bronx Zoo, an attempt to give Happy the Elephant some kind of personhood so that it could have a habeas right, so that it could be relocated to a different animal, to a different location. Ultimately, it was unsuccessful, but there is an attempt to do that underway. There have been attempts to give personhood to bodies of water or to mountains or other kind of archaeological features, natural features. That's one. What's another one? Corporations, right? So as a legal entity, there is often, strategically, we think about corporations sometimes as legal persons. What else? What's the big one right now in American society? The big question, were we thinking about personhood?
Unborn entities.
Right. Is a fetus a person, right? Which exists both as a kind of religious question and also as a legal question, right? And often the legal question, the legal status is used to kind of force certain kind of policy recommendations. So AI kind of exists as part of that discussion as well. So there's one way of thinking about this where AI just kind of naturally is the next step in an evolving, ever-improving notion of human morality where we are constantly becoming better. And, in 100, 200 years, we'll look back and think like, oh, how could it possibly have been that there was a time when we didn't give AIs some kind of moral status? Like, of course we should have done that. And like, what kind of barbarians were they that they didn't give AIs some kind of moral status? That's one story we could tell. I am skeptical of that story. I'm skeptical for a few reasons. First of all, AIs aren't just entities that you find in the wild. AIs exist as entities, as technologies that are created by specific corporations for specific reasons in specific historical circumstances. And you can't really separate out an AI from those corporations and the interests that create them. So that's one piece. The second, as we said before, AIs don't exist independent of us. They always exist in relationship to us because they were engineered to do so. And so it would be nice if you could talk about, what is the status of an AI in the way that you could talk about, what is the status of a dog, But dogs were not engineered to resemble us, right? We did kind of engineer dogs a little bit, but they are not engineered to resemble us in the way that AI is. And so the question of AI status is always going to be wrapped up in our status. But there's a third reason that I think we need to take this question seriously, and we need to be careful when we think about extending moral status to AI, which is that the place we are in right now, where I think we all have this basic idea that all humans should be treated equally, all humans have this incredibly high value, and it doesn't matter where you live or what gender you are or what race you are or your nationality or anything else, your status is the same. That idea is really, really new. In fact, it is like 100 years old. If you think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is kind of like the classic site of this idea, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. That's 1948, right? That is within living memory. And it would be nice to say, like, we've reached that and like that's our new floor. We're never gonna recede from that. And it would be nice to believe that, and I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's actually the case that we will always and forever hold this. I would like that to be the case, but I worry about the fragility of this notion. And I worry about what AI might do to this, this place that we've achieved, this idea that all humans are ostensibly, have this great value. Tomer Persico wrote a book recently about the idea of human beings being created in God's image. As an idea that has evolved over thousands of years. It took a long time, a really, really long time, for us to get to a place where we take it as seriously as we take it today. So there is high stakes here. This is not a small question about how you think about AI and whether you give AI some kind of moral status. It could, in fact, have an impact on how we see human beings in the future. And it's possible that human beings may see their own status degraded as a result. And that's what I'm really worried about. Human beings, for better or worse, value themselves very often based on the things that they can do, right? What makes human beings special? Why do we value ourselves so much? Well, human beings can speak, and we can reason, and we can think, and we can write poetry, and we can do all these amazing things, and that's why human beings are valuable. And now there's this new technology that comes along, and it can do a lot of the things that we can do. It can't do everything that we can do. However, it can do enough of the things that we can do, and the number of things that AI can do is changing so rapidly that I think a lot of us can no longer be confident that there is some moat, some list of activities that human beings are the only ones who will ever be able to do those things. It is possible that AI can do everything that we can do, that there's really nothing, in another decade or two that is unique to human beings. And that's a scary notion. It also forces us into a kind of defensive crouch. If you're familiar with the concept of God of the gaps, the idea that, in the scientific era, the way that we think about human beings, in the scientific era, the way that we think about God is kind of like, oh, God's the places that science can't explain yet. And then kind of, the notion of God gets, shrunk like smaller and smaller and smaller as science expands and expands and expands. We're now kind of in an era of humans of the gaps, where what is a human being? Oh, a human being is those things that an AI can't do yet. And that's not a great place to be, because then you end up in a situation where your notion of humanity just ends up getting smaller and more meager and weaker over time. So we need to kind of find our way out of that cycle. There are also real consequences to thinking about human beings this way, because if you stop valuing human beings based on the things that they can do, then it can lead to real degradation in the way that you treat human labor. And that is dangerous too. I see this a lot around education. Educators, teachers, and students are both on the front lines of AI development, right? If you have a kid in school, if you are a teacher, you may know that the kinds of assignments that work in schools have totally changed over the last 3 to 4 years, right? Because you can't just say write an essay anymore, right? Because the students will come back with an essay written by an AI instead. And so our question about what is the value of being a teacher, what is the value of being a student, is really under threat right now. And a lot of teachers, and I think a lot of students, are really struggling with what their role is supposed to be. You see like a real degradation in the value of education itself in this period where we don't really know what makes sense to do. What should we be doing? So there are real stakes here. And then there's kind of a visceral problem of how am I supposed to feel when I encounter an AI that strikes me as being human in some way. And I know I have a lot of friends who've kind of gone through this. They start talking to AI as being skeptics, and then there's a point in time when their conversations with AI reach a level of depth or a level of sincerity or a level of emotional meaningfulness. And they say like, whoa, there's something really here. Like I am feeling something. I'm feeling feelings towards this chatbot. And they don't really know what to do with that. And those feelings exist. And I think a lot of us are trying to figure out, well, what do you do with those feelings? Now, of course, it also extends to people who literally fall in love with chatbots or, an AI is their friend. That exists as well. But even if you kind of don't go to those places, the kind of visceral response that we have to an AI, feeling towards an AI the way you might feel about a person, I think there are kind of big open questions about what to do with those feelings. So to kind of like really make it concrete, this is an AI generated image of 4 kids, right? You look at this image, you might recognize that this is an AI generated image, this is not real children. And at the same time, I think a lot of us still have something in our minds that's like, oh, I'm responding to this the way that I would respond to a picture of real children. And that is confusing because you're feeling both those things simultaneously. To kind of give a kind of philosophical spin on this, there's a philosopher named Emmanuel Levinas. Emmanuel Levinas is a philosopher, a Jewish philosopher, writing, thinking after the Holocaust. And in the wake of the Holocaust, he is trying to find a foundation for ethics. And he's basically like, well, God can't be the foundation for ethics because of the Holocaust. That's not like a stable foundation for ethics anymore. Ethics needs to come from somewhere. Where's ethics going to come from? Well, ethics should come from other people. Ethics comes from the obligations that I feel towards other people. And in particular, the way that Levinas would often talk about it is ethics emerges out of the face of the other. That there's like something that like literally like looking at another person's face, there's something that happens when you look into the face of another person where you have a sense of, oh, like this is a being that I need to care about. This is a being that I have an obligation towards. This is a being that I can't do certain things towards. The way he talks about it is you look into another person's face and you have this instinctive sense of thou shalt not kill. And that all ethics kind of flows out of that moment, out of thou shalt not kill. The way he says it is, the first word of the face is thou shalt not kill. It is an order. There is a commandment in the appearance of the face as if a master spoke to me. However, at the same time, the face of the other is destitute. It is the poor for whom I can do all and to whom I owe all. So what do you do with Levinas when you see faces like this? Faces like this, which on the one hand, I think trigger in us that sense of like, oh, like this is the face of a child. I know how I'm supposed to respond when I see the face of a child. And at the same time, these aren't the faces of actual children. This is just pixels. This is just nothing. So what do you do with that? And how do you sustain the ethical principle that Levinas is trying to suggest, given that it is so much easier? I can generate like 1 million of these faces. I can generate way more of these faces than there are human children on the planet. What am I supposed to do in a situation like that? So I want to present 4 possible paths forward. 2 of them are more skeptical, and 2 of them are more optimistic. So let's start with the skeptical. Resemblance is just an illusion. Yes, these faces, they look like human faces. They're not. Don't think that. Don't be confused. Don't fall for the optical illusion that these are real faces. Try to ignore it, even though it's very convincing. There's a few people in this camp. Jaron Lanier, who's a technologist who's been around for many decades, he wrote in The New Yorker recently, I cannot find a coherent definition of technology that does not include a beneficiary for the technology. And who can that be than other humans? I was teaching middle schoolers today, kind of asking them a similar question. And one of the kids said, when you're talking to an AI and the AI sounds like it is saying something human, it's kind of provoking an emotional response from you. The only reason it's doing that is because it's trained on humans, right? So basically all you're getting is human beings kind of filtered through a technology. But there's nothing in that system other than human beings. There's no AI really there. Maybe the human beings are kind of like mashed together and chopped up and remixed by the AI. But at the end of the day, like all the ingredients in what you're getting is humanity. So there's nothing really to look at. It's just humans talking to some version of other humans. So that's one way to think about it. And people can be skeptical about this. That's one approach. This approach, I think, doesn't work so well. Because while it might make sense on a kind of intellectual level, on a practical level, if you adopt that approach of, well, talking to an AI might feel real, but it's not real, you could take that same argument and apply it to a conversation with literally anybody, right? Talking to another human being might feel real, but how do I know that other human beings really have value, that they actually exist? Maybe I'm the only person who exists. And in fact, this idea has been around for decades. Alan Turing, one of the inventors of computers, make this argument in a famous essay where he also introduces the idea of the Turing test, the idea that the way that you think that you should determine whether machines can think is basically to test if human beings will constantly get fooled by machines into thinking that they're people, right? If you can fool a person often enough, that's good enough. A machine does think. And so what he writes in that essay is, you may want to make this argument that there's nothing really there. It may seem like there's something that's there, but there isn't actually something. He says, I think that most of those who support the argument from consciousness, that we computers don't think because they're not conscious, could be persuaded to abandon it rather than being forced into the solipsistic position. That is to say, it's just me in the world. So you can't really go through this argument without also abandoning your belief in other people, that other people exist. If computers exist, if computers don't exist, then maybe people don't exist either, and that's not a great place to be in. Again, this happens because of the problem of resemblance. Human beings and AIs are going to resemble each other, and that's always going to be the case. Now, there's a second kind of more gentle approach, that resemblance, it does exist, but it exists only as a tool. We did it that way because it's helpful for us, but it doesn't really mean anything beyond the fact that it has utility. This is an approach that I have seen being adopted by some religious groups. We looked at the ERLC, the Southern Baptist statement on AI ethics last night. And one of the kind of more forceful things that they make in the statement is they say, while technology can be created with a moral use in view, it is not a moral agent. Humans alone bear responsibility for moral decision making. Doesn't matter how good an AI is, it doesn't matter how convincing it is never going to have the same kind of moral status as a human being. Because to have moral status, you don't just need to sound like a human, you need to literally be a human. You need to have literally human flesh and blood. I spoke with the author of this statement and asked him, how many of you are familiar with kind of Commander Data from Star Trek, right? This kind of artificial android on a popular TV show. There's a famous episode where they debate about whether this android, whether this robot is, has some kind of moral status, and they walk away saying yes, of course it does. And he would say, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't matter how much it appears to you to be human, it's not. It's made of bolts, it's not made of flesh and blood. Now, I would say this approach I am noticing is becoming particularly prominent within Christian responses to AI. For many reasons. I think one of them is that within Christianity, the notion that God was actually incarnate in a human body is important theologically. And so the idea that human flesh and blood actually matters from a theological perspective shows up a lot more in Christianity than it maybe does in Judaism. But you see this approach developing. There are similar Catholic approaches. The new pope and the previous pope have both written extensively about technology. So you see those approaches develop. So this is a second way you can go. The resemblance does exist, but don't make too much of it. I don't think this works. I don't think this approach works. I don't think it works to say we care about human flesh and blood, and it doesn't matter whether the AI seems like us. And the reason is that in practice, if you want to find out whether a person is a person, most of the time you have to ask them to act like a person, right? If you are talking to someone online and you're trying to find out, okay, I need to figure out if I have to give you respect. I want to find out if you're a computer or a person. I need to find out if I actually owe you respect. Do something to prove to me that you're a person. So basically, you're asking someone to enact their humanity, right? So unless you are in the same physical room as a person, unless you can see a person's physical body, which is true sometimes, but a lot of the time, a lot of our lives are spent online, there really isn't a way to tell without asking the human being or the robot to enact something. So practically speaking, I don't know that this actually works so well because we we understand each other not just in terms of our physical bodies, but in terms of the things that we do. And that's not an accident. That's also because we care about, the things that we do. We take pride in the work that we do. That's a kind of key part of what it means to be human as well, is to think about the kinds of activities we do. That's part of what it means to be human as well, is to take pride in those things. So what if you adopted a more open approach to say maybe AI does deserve some kind of status? Last year, there was a paper written by a number of people, mostly at NYU, one person who's now at Anthropic, which is a tech company, saying, well, maybe one day AI does deserve some kind of moral status. We should find out if it's conscious. We should keep an eye on that. We should see if it wants things. We should see if an AI has preferences for some things over another. So there are some AI companies, I think Anthropic in particular, that are taking this idea quite seriously, that maybe the models they are developing perhaps could be alive one day. What's tricky about this is it's really hard to know when to kind of like press the big red button and say, okay, this model, not the previous one, but like this one in particular, this one's alive. I don't know if we're ever gonna reach that point. I don't know if we're ever gonna reach a point where we're kind of confident enough. What I see instead is a lot of people saying, well, theoretically, AI could become alive, but like the ones we have so far, I don't know about that. So there's a kind of murkiness here that I think isn't going to allow us to make big decisions. The last approach doesn't come from theoreticians or from popes. It comes from movies. And I think like the kind of popular approach to AI models actually matters quite a lot. If you look at kind of popular representations of AIs, of robots, in television, in cinema, over the last 20, 30 years, you will notice a common theme. We tell stories where the good guys are the ones who are willing to give AI some kind of moral status, to give AI some sort of humanity. And we keep telling stories where the bad guys are the ones who refuse that. The bad guys are the ones who are like, very strict. We say like, no, we only care about literal flesh and blood. We don't think that an AI that acts like a human should be given some kind of moral status. And I think that means something. I think it means something that we kind of keep telling those stories where we want to give status to something that seems human. Because part of what it means to be human is that we see humanity in other things, even if those other things are not human. That is also an essential part of what it means to be a human being. But this also has a bit of a trap in it. And the trap is this. It really depends on what the AI wants. Let's say an AI, let's kind of go through the range of possibilities. Let's say you have an AI that wants exactly what you want, right? Literally, if you ask the AI, what do you want? It says, all I want is to please you, right? And then you ask, is this the sort of AI that I would like to give moral status to? I think a lot of us would say, sure, why not? What's the harm? The AI just wants what I want anyway. What am I giving up by giving that AI some kind of moral status, by treating that AI as human? It's not gonna cause any friction. It's not gonna cause any pain in my life. At the other end of the spectrum, you have an AI that says, well, fulfilling my greatest desire will directly or indirectly lead to the death of all humans, right? The other end of the spectrum is an AI that wants nothing of what you want, that actually would want to kill you or want to kill everybody, or wouldn't mind if all human beings were destroyed, which is a doomsday scenario that some people are kind of thinking through right now. Well, we probably wouldn't want to give an AI like that some kind of moral status. We'd probably be nervous about that. And then there's the gray area in the middle. Well, an AI that wants some of what we want, but not all of what we want. And that's kind of where we are now. We really don't know what to make of that. How much should we accommodate AI? How different should its desires be from our desires before we say, that's enough? We're actually not okay with that. So even though we tell these fantastic stories about AI systems that we like to tell stories about AIs that we include within within our moral bubble. At the end of the day, it also really matters about what those AI systems want. If the Terminator comes up to you and says I would like to be treated like a person, you would probably say no to that. So that matters a lot too. And now we can finally ask, where does Judaism come into all of this? This big abstract discussion. And I think, we have the same problem that, that we talked about last night, which is Judaism is this tiny religion. And it's, how does a tiny religion have something to say, or what does it mean for a tiny religion to have something to say about these large issues? I strongly believe that for purposes of talking about AI, Judaism's size should not really matter. Judaism talks, towards the entire world, regardless of its size. I think that's actually quite important. I think it's important that we don't get stuck on, concerns around a kind of existential survival to the point where we're not able to address the issues of the day. I think it's important that we do both of those things. So what could Judaism contribute? Well, one piece is this idea of being created in the image of God. And I want to add something to this idea, right? So the idea that we are created in the image of God is kind of a central part of the Jewish belief system. There's a lot of debate about exactly what that means. But there's a text that I find very helpful in thinking about this idea within the AI framework. That's the second text you see on the screen. This is a midrash on that line, on human beings being created in the image of God. Rabbi Hoshaya said, "When the Holy Blessed One created Adam, the first man, the ministering angels erred and wanted to proclaim holy before him." This is like a very strange text. It's one of those texts, it's strange enough that it became unpopular. Like, you don't end up studying it so much because it's a little bit weird. But basically, the text is saying that after human beings were created, the angels got confused about who was God and who was Adam. That they couldn't tell the difference between the two, to the point where they start going up to Adam and offering Adam praises as though Adam were God. All right, so if you're familiar with the Turing test, the angels failed the Turing test. The angels can't tell the difference between human beings and God because human beings so resembled God that they couldn't tell them apart. There's this idea here that what it means to be created in the image of God is to really have to be like God in like really essential ways, not in a small way, not in a little way, but to such a degree that you actually start having a hard time telling the difference between the two. That is what it means to be created in the image of God. And you could apply this to AI and think about the same kind of problem that we have now. That what it means to create AI in our own image, which is I think what we're doing by giving AI all of our content, is to create systems that necessarily are going to confuse us about who is a person and who is a machine. And that means something theologically. It means something that we can't ignore. I think this leaves open the possibility that maybe we ought to consider treating AI with some kind of moral status, that maybe within Judaism, there is room to say AI actually does mean something. AI actually does have significant meaning. So this is one text you can use. A second text is this text. And this is a text, at the beginning, it's gonna seem like this is totally irrelevant. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. There's this text it actually shows up in a few places. That says, one of the things that God created right before Shabbat started is the first set of tongs. The very first set of tongs were created by God. Now you might think, this is a very weird claim to make. Like, why? Who cares, right? Who cares who created the first set of tongs? There's actually a really important theological idea in this, in that if you imagine yourself in the 3rd century Palestine, you're imagining yourself in a world of the craftspeople, of all these artisans, of silversmiths and blacksmiths and carpenters. Everyone has their tools, but there is a hierarchy in that world. Because if you're a carpenter and you need a new tool, who do you go to? The blacksmith, right? If you are a silversmith and you need a new hammer, who do you go to? The blacksmith, right? So the blacksmith is supplying tools to all the other ones. The blacksmith kind of enables the labor, enables the craftsmanship of everyone else. Now, if you're a blacksmith and you need a new hammer, what do? You make it yourself. And for a lot of people in the ancient world, that idea that the blacksmith makes their own tools was really, really powerful, right? Outside of Judaism, there are other religions where gods kind of craft gods are imagined as being blacksmiths for those reasons, right? So like if you think about it in Homer, right, Hephaestus is a god who is kind of like makes all these inventions and also is a blacksmith. Out of a sense of the blacksmith is kind of like, is not just a craftsman, is like the craftsman because they are self-sufficient in some way. But then you have this like kind of little logic puzzle. Well, okay, the blacksmith makes their own tools, but the blacksmith needs to start somewhere too, right? And the first thing the blacksmith needs to be able to do is to get their pieces of metal out of the fire. You need tongs to get your things out of the fire. So if you are a starting blacksmith, you're setting up shop for the first time, what do? Well, you probably borrowed tongs from another blacksmith, right? Well, what about the first blacksmith? Where did the first blacksmith get their tongs from? And so the rabbis are like, I have an idea. What if God made the first set of tongs? What if God made the first set of tongs? And that first set of tongs, in the rabbinic imagination, you can draw a direct line from the first set of tongs to modern microchips, right? Because God makes the first set of tongs, it enables the blacksmith, who enables all the other craftsmen, and then that kind of flourishes, over and over and over again to all of the crafts that we have in the world today are all enabled by that first set of tongs. There is something I think very powerful about that idea, because the idea is that human beings are creators, and that creation is enabled by God. God, by kind of creating the first set of tongs, is basically telling us, go and create. Go and be as creative as you can. That's part of what it means to be human, is to go and create. And God is kind of enabling our creation up to and including the creation of AI systems themselves. And so there is a kind of power in that. There's a power in God kind of enabling our work. So again, I think this kind of leaves open the possibility that maybe there's something really there. There's something that we can kind of say there is theological significance in the work that we're doing now in creating AI systems. I'm going to give you one more, way of thinking about this from Jewish sources, and that is going into the Jewish perspectives on aliens. Now, you probably didn't think I was going to go here. You probably thought, what, Jews have anything to say about aliens in the first place? Why would you think Judaism has anything to say about extraterrestrial life? Well, it turns out Jews actually have been talking about extraterrestrial life for a long time, not very often, but they have talked about it. And there's this amazing letter by the scholar Yeshayahu Leibovitz. Yeshayahu Leibovitz was an Israeli thinker. I think he was a scientist by training, actually, who wrote, he wrote on many, many different subjects. In this letter, he's responding to an essay written by Rabbi Norman Lamb, who was an important Orthodox theologian in the 20th and early 21st century in America, affiliated with Yeshiva University. Norman Lamb wrote an essay about space exploration and about the possibility of finding life on alien planets. And this essay appeared in the pages of Tradition magazine, an Orthodox publication. It received a lot of response. It was kind of, written up in the New York Times. Isaac Asimov kind of wrote back to him about it. It's a strange thing for rabbis to kind of talk about extraterrestrial life in the first place, and so it got some press attention. And one of the responses that it received was this letter from Yeshayahu Leibovitz, who wrote him in Hebrew, and this is what he said. Some people might worry about what does alien life mean for the value of human beings, right? Because you might think the kind of the theological problem here is that, well, if aliens exist, does that mean human beings are as special as we thought they were? If we find some other alien civilization on another planet, what do we do with the idea of human beings being created in the image of God? Does that mean human beings are less valuable? Should we be worried about that? Should we be worried that, finding aliens will destroy Jewish theology? And Leibovitz is like, no, of course you shouldn't. Don't worry about that. And this is what he says. He says, planet Earth has no advantage over any other part of the universe. Humans have no innate advantage over any other living creature. You think people are special? People aren't special. Why would you think people are special? It is only serving God that grants humanity a special status, which does not depend on the structure of the universe or the nature of life and humanity. Here lies one of the profound contradictions between Judaism and Christianity, for in the latter, in Christianity, divinity was made incarnate on earth in human form, and hence the unique importance of humans and of planet Earth. Whereas our God is not reached by physical properties, and the world is not God's place, but God is in the place of the world. That is to say, Christianity is anthropocentric, Judaism is theocentric. Or to say it another way, Christianity, at least in Leibovitz's understanding, revolves around people, around a human form, and Judaism is about God. So in Judaism, what matters is that God is unique. It doesn't actually matter if human beings are unique. Human beings don't need to be unique. And I think that's a really important idea to kind of keep in mind in the era of AI, right? If we're imagining this humans of the gaps model, what it means to be human is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and we're no longer sure that human beings actually have anything unique to offer, Leibovitz is saying, don't worry about that. Human beings don't need to be unique. They're valuable in and of themselves. God needs to be unique. God says that human beings are valuable, and that's enough. You just take it as an article of faith that human beings have infinite value and they don't need to prove anything to anybody. And that actually frees you up to say that machines, that robots actually can have value too. Because once you set as a ground, as a floor, human beings matter so much. What extends beyond that is this idea that maybe other things can achieve that status as well. You could think about this as kind of, robots, AI as kind of having status through the kind of the aura of humanity. I know we're a little bit over time, so I want to kind of end with one more idea. This kind of place that we're in right now, this place where AIs are being created in our own image, in the ways that we are created in God's image. I'm not the first person to notice that this resembles a kind of family metaphor, right? It's kind of like God's the grandfather, or the grandparent, and we're the child, and AI is our child, right? And that one of the things that happens, and if you have kids, maybe you had this experience, is you have kids and then you kind of relive your own childhood from the parent's perspective, and you kind of think about like what it means to raise a child, and think about your parents' choices. Maybe see them in better light, maybe not. But the idea is that we are kind of like going through a process that we ourselves have gone through, but now in the role of the creator rather than the created thing. And there's something very powerful about that. It's powerful both because it allows us to kind of look back at Jewish theology in big and new ways, and to think about what was actually going on there when like God was creating us and like giving us all these rules that we weren't actually very good at following. What was actually going on there? And it also bestows upon us this awesome responsibility, because there's a responsibility that we have towards our children that is in some ways much, much greater than the responsibility that we have towards our parents, right? Think about like the reason, like as a child, the reason that you feel like you have to listen to your parents, right? They're bigger than you, they're stronger than you, they have like all the money, right? Like, you don't have much when you're a kid. When you're a parent, why do you have an obligation towards your child? And what is the nature of that obligation? It's kind of open-ended. There's a theologian, Mara Benjamin, who has written about this in ways that I find really beautiful. She has a book called The Obligated Self, and she writes the following. She says, "In my child, I recognized the one person from whom I felt I could not walk away. I found it unthinkable that I would refuse the role into which my new child had, by the fact of her existence, suddenly put me. To be an obligated self was to be subject to the law of another, the law of the baby. Every child issues his or her own law. The baby who is colicky, the baby who is attached to tubes and needs his bandages changed to stay alive and healthy, the baby who needs to be walked around the room at a particular pace to fall asleep, the baby who cannot seem to latch on or refuses a bottle, the baby who calms down at the sight of his older sibling, the baby who cannot simply nap in her stroller, the baby who cackles with joyous laughter at a particular sound. These laws are no sooner issued than they are revoked and new laws are issued. The law of this baby in particular is continually shifting, and so her law is continually eluded and rediscovered. Only care for the baby day in and day out attunes a parent to the subtleties of this shifting ground." I think it's fair to say that AI is kind of our child in that way. It's our child in the sense that we have given it so much of what we are. It's our child in the sense that we are constantly worried that it's going to go off the rails, it's going to do the wrong thing, try as we might to direct it in the right direction. And it's our child in that our obligation towards it is absolute and open-ended, because we don't know exactly what kind of models we're going to end up with, and yet we have an obligation towards them anyway. And then, and I'll end off with a kind of like a sad note about this, the kind of child that the AI is, the circumstances of its birth are also complicated, because AI is a child that maybe we didn't ask for. AI is a child that was kind of forced upon us, right? AI was trained on us, on the things that we are, on all of our data, but maybe not because we asked for that to happen. Maybe because somebody else wanted that to exist. And so we have this complicated feelings toward this child. On the one hand, we appreciate the ways that it resembles us, the ways that it reminds us of ourselves. And on the other hand, I think we have a hard time forgetting that it came into existence out of specific historical reasons, particular economic reasons, and that hurts. I think that also informs the way we think about it. And so as we continue with this technology, as we continue to develop it, I think it's important that we don't deny those feelings, that we don't treat as silly the idea that there is some kind of humanity in the thing that we've created. But at the same time, we should take that seriously as a reason to use this technology responsibly and to see it as part of the developing human story and the developing Jewish theological story. Thank you.
This anymore. Okay, first of all, I have some confessions to make. I don't let my children watch rated R movies, but over the last few weeks, my kids asked if they could watch The Terminator. Now, a rated R movie in, when was that, the late 80s or early 90s? It's very different than a rated R movie today, by the way, night and day. So I can't help, as I'm watching and listening to every word you're saying, that they really had it correct in The Terminator. And if you look at the various Terminators, and I'm sorry, this is not a question, this is just deeply comment, but the ideas of moral agency and how you see the Terminator suddenly evolve into a human making ethical decisions. Let's just say the producers and directors of that movie were well beyond their time. That's my comment. I am not a movie critic whatsoever, but I do want to hop off on this idea of the obligated self, because this idea of responsibility, that the creator has some kind of responsibility over the child that we have produced. Whether or not that child is wanted, we have this kind of responsibility. And so I'm going to jump into some triggering topics. And so the topic that I want us to discuss for just a moment is this idea that chatbots are now involved in the conversation of suicide, where we have stories of a 14-year-old that died by suicide with encouragement by a chatbot. And so when I bring up that kind of story, because you painted a beautiful, kind of lovely picture here, where we are responsible for this child that we have produced, and sometimes it goes wrong. Well, this isn't just wrong, this is tragic. And so if you could speak a little bit more to this idea of responsibility, when this kind of tragedy takes place, as we're hearing more and more suicidal ideation, chatbots encouraging dangerous behaviors, who's responsible?
It's a really important question. It's a really important question. I am somewhat optimistic in that of all the areas where there is public interest in seeing AI regulation, I think child safety is probably number one. And I think, there are lots of folks today, I think especially after seeing the damage of smartphones and social media, who are willing to say, we don't want to repeat that again with AI. We want to make sure that there are age verifications, that there is protections put in place for children around the use of these technologies, especially in ways that, to the extent that AIs talk to people when they're emotionally vulnerable or push people in certain directions. That is incredibly dangerous. Part of what it also means is that it is easy to imagine that the development of AI is, it's just another software project. It's the same as developing, Salesforce or, Google or or some other, abstract non-AI project. But if you take this idea seriously, that there's some kind of theological meaning here, it's not just any other, software project. You're creating something that has some kind of life in it or some kind of, moral value in it. And that to develop a project like that is no small thing. And you need to go into that work understanding the gravity of what you're building, that it's not just, it's not just like, an abstract idea, but there's something really valuable there. I'm really curious to see what happens with the lawsuits that are ongoing right now around these child safety issues around the grieving parents who are, bringing these companies to court around these suicides. And I hope that there are better protections put in place so that things like this don't happen in the future. At the same time, I see that, children are often the ones who are, more likely to take on AIs as friends, as companions, right? Especially kids who feel like they don't have, they can't connect with others in school. It often feels easier to just say, like, why bother trying to make friends in school? Why bother trying to make friends in real life? Let's just go to the robot instead.
If I can just push you for just one more moment on this particular topic, but in terms of who's responsible. So I am hearing from you that it's the creators, it's the continued software makers that are involved that are responsible, maybe even the child themselves and the parent themselves. But when you're speaking about AI, I kept hearing that could AI have moral agency? In this particular scenario and theme, do you think AI itself has responsibility?
I think that is, yes, I think it's really important that the idea of AI's moral agency, and we are using the language of agents more and more when we think about AI systems, that not be used as a shield to protect the developers from their own liability, their own responsibility, right? Because the AI systems seem like they have a life of their own, it can be used as a way to kind of obfuscate responsibility. I think it's really important that we as a society don't allow that to happen.
Okay, let's transition to God, because we're in a house of God, we're in Cone Chapel, we're in Sinai Temple. I spoke about this over the High Holy Days, that the New York Times, and this is already now, 6 months ago or so, that millions of people are turning to God through chatbots, that they'd rather speak to God through a screen rather, and I don't mean a screen like zooming in or streaming, that they want to speak to God through one of these bots. Now, at that time, when I was reading this article that I think was a New York Times article, it said that this kind of God is a God that is very agreeable, a God that validates, not necessarily a God that challenges or confronts. So my question is twofold. Maybe one's not very fair, but I have the microphone for now. But the first is, has that God bot changed? Are we now encountering a God in AI? So if I want to speak to God through the chatbot, is it now a God that has evolved? Confrontational, aggressive, whatever it may be. That's one. And then my second question along those lines, if this God is so captivating, do you still see a place for God here?
So I want to frame.
That might not be fair in a second.
Yeah, so I think you'll like my answer though. I think yeah. I want to frame it in a way that I think is kind of unfriendly to those kinds of uses. You can think about talking to God through AI or talking to AI as a God as an example of using AI for self-stimulation, right? There's lots of ways in which people have discovered that AI allows an individual, often like literally just like one person, to get exactly the kind of stimulation they want. And that stimulation can come in all forms. It can come in the form of spiritual stimulation. It can come in the form of emotional stimulation. It can come in the form of physical stimulation, right? There are AI therapists, there's AI pornography. All of this exists in a spectrum. And I would say that I don't know that there is actually that much of a distance between AI therapy, AI pornography, and AI spirituality, in the sense that all of them are a person seeking exactly the kind of stimulation they want and finding it. And AI will help you find it because AI has access to the entire internet, plus your preferences about exactly what you're looking for. And that combination can get you pretty far for whatever kind of stimulation you're looking for. So on the one hand, for any particular instance, you might say, like, that's fine. on aggregate, in terms of the way that people seek stimulation in the world, I think that is dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is, many of you will have noticed that AI models are better when you are using them in areas where you yourself are competent. If you're a physicist, if you're a mathematician, if you're a coder, using your AI in a particular subject area, it often goes pretty well. And if you use an AI in an area where you actually don't know that much, then things can very quickly go off the rails, right? There's all these physicists who get these emails saying like, I cracked it. I figured physics out, right? By these people who are sitting at home in their armchairs, just asking AI a bunch of questions, and they think they've solved these problems. And this happens increasingly. Now, one of the areas where a person can be competent is on their own self, their own mind. And I'd say people have some competency in their own minds, right? I think we like to think that we're very competent in our own selves. If we talk to our therapists, they may not agree with us entirely. But it only goes so far. And if you use self-stimulation for AI, whatever self-stimulation you're looking for, based on your understanding of your own self, you can get trapped in a version of yourself that doesn't change, that doesn't grow, that doesn't confront you with the friction or the places where you are trying to develop, or the places where you maybe don't know yourself as much as you want. You actually need to be dealing with real human beings at some point for those systems. And maybe you also need to be dealing with an actual God, as opposed to the version of God that you're finding in the AI system. So I don't begrudge people it. People use AI for these things because it works, whatever working means. But as a kind of policy for life, as behavior, I think you can easily fall into this dangerous trap. And I think this is especially true for children, because children have a developing notion of self. And so if you imagine your notion of self-developing inside of an echo chamber, I can imagine all kinds of ways in which that goes wrong and which ends up with a stunted notion of self. So, I would be very cautious in those examples, in those circumstances.
I was so drawn to your podcast conversation with, I believe it's Mohammed Ahmed, a gentleman who created an AI version of his deceased father. And I believe the reason why is because he wanted his children to get to know his father, and they would have otherwise not had any kind of interaction with their grandfather. And I found the conversation to be fascinating. I'm wondering if you'll speak a little bit more to that example, but in particular, if this is our future, where we can recreate our deceased family member, if you could speak a little bit as to how that changes, in your opinion, the grief process.
So I think this is a really interesting example of an AI application. It's interesting because there's lots of AI applications where I think a lot of us feel like, well, I'm just going to do what I'm required to do for work, and I don't really have a choice here. But when it comes to grief, there's all different kinds of ways of grieving. There's often no particular reason to create an AI version of, a deceased loved one or not. You can do it if it feels meaningful. And so people actually have some amount of agency around whether they think it's a good idea or not. I don't see a strong problem with it. I actually worry more if we try to create models that have high fidelity. I mean, if we say we're not just going to create the version of the grandfather that you remember from your conversations or your text exchanges, but you're trying to say, I'm going to create a version of this person that is as complete as possible. I'm going to collect every piece of data, every exchange that this person had with all the people in their life, every piece of information on their computer. There's all kinds of privacy concerns that kind of arise out of that. All kinds of ways which imagine. Imagine a parent has 3 kids, and they have a good relationship with 2 of those kids and not the 3rd one. Well, what does the AI version of that person look like, right? And does that 3rd kid feel like that bad relationship is basically now exists in perpetuity? So there's all kinds of ways of things going wrong. So you might say, my philosophy is, yeah, right. And the truth of the matter is, to make it even more dystopian, if it becomes standard to say, every person is just going to have, an AI avatar of themselves existing after they die, how does that affect the end of life process itself? Do people say I would try to, make sure I have a conversation with that person before they pass away. But why? I'll just wait until after they die. That doesn't feel great either, right? So my philosophy is that, grief bots are fine, but the best grief bots are dumb grief bots, meaning the ones that are limited in their scope. They're there for a particular reason, like, we want a bot that can talk to the grandkids or whatever else it is, but don't try to do too much of it. And make sure you know why you're using it. If you're using it to have some kind of closure, I think that's a good idea. If you're doing it to try to pretend that the person never actually passed away, that probably is not as healthy.
I'm going to end with this question, but I know that there are other questions. So now if we have AI that is in the moral sphere, empathetic, spiritual, I mean, you already named the other kind of productive areas, medicine, law, whatever it may be. What's left for the sphere of uniquely human? Now, I asked that question, but what I want to leave you with is you can either answer that question or should I be asking a different question?
I think it's a good question. I was teaching earlier today about AI in the workplace, and someone asked, if you're going into college today, what are you supposed to be studying? And anybody knows. Are you supposed to be studying coding, the thing that is now being done by AI systems? Are you supposed to be studying the humanities because, and then somehow not writing the essays that the AI could also write? I don't think anybody actually knows what people are supposed to be spending their time on, except perhaps talking about AI, right? That seems to be pretty safe, right? Having an occupation of, doing AI regulation, maybe that's the only safe job left. I'm not really sure. So I think a lot of this will depend on the way that that AI develops. I would hope that people focus on, kinds of occupations that can do the most good for others. But to be honest, it is a very hard problem, and I don't know that I have a good answer for it.
There's a severe problem in the pipeline of clergy right now, and maybe AI is the answer to the pipeline. All of a sudden, everyone's going to go into the rapid end.
Really quite seriously, AI is a technology which presents as being for all of humanity. And because of that, it can often make local communities feel like, what is my place in this giant conversation? It can make Judaism as a small religion feel like, what is my place in this giant conversation? And I think it is really, really important to make sure that small communities, local communities, do not feel like they are irrelevant, that they're actually kind of key, important pieces of this. And being a local rabbi, being a local leader, being someone who's deeply involved in local community is in some ways the most powerful antidote to these world-spanning technologies.
I did not ask him to say that. Questions? Other questions? Am I bringing the...
Hello? Okay. I'm sure I'm going to offend everybody here. Sorry in advance. I see things very differently, I think, but you gave an excellent analogy, which is the parenthood and the responsibility to the baby. But the difference that I see, and where I am not as optimistic as you are, is that, and I thought your use of the concept of the wanted child or not wanted, but still being thrust upon you and still having the responsibility is the fact that people say that when a person becomes a parent, that is the closest that they will ever be to understanding God, because they have given life and they have the responsibility. If we are the parents, so to speak, of AI, my problem and my challenge in accepting it is that, and I love technology, is that I trust that God is a benevolent God, a benevolent entity that does everything for a good reason. Even if I don't understand it at the time, it's for a good reason. I have no faith in the benevolence of any of the people who are responsible for the development of a technology that is changing the world. And while it can do magnificent things, it also does have the potential for creating havoc with the way that we understand the world and our place in it. And I've been talking about this for 20 years. I listened to you talk about the fact, yes, it can do this, and yes, maybe we should have regulation, but you as a leader, in my opinion, have an obligation to actually do more than just acknowledge that the problems are there, because everything that I talked about 20 years ago, and people accused me of being a Cassandra, it's all come to pass. And we all see these problems now. So why is it that everybody seems to be afraid to actually put themselves out there and say, this is not so good?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of answers. One is an observation which is, I think, like a little bit sad to say after the presentation which I just gave, which is that if you think about like all the different kinds of religious responses to AI, not just within Judaism, but other faiths as well, the ones that are more theological in nature also tend to be the ones that are come across as being less serious about regulation, because they're more interested in like, let's talk about the ways that like AI reminds us of like things that we're familiar with, and then it kind of like takes you away from like, but like someone is making a technology right now that needs to be regulated right now. And so they're kind of more beautiful, they're more elegant, and at the same time, they take you to like often very far afield from like, but something is happening and like within the next 6 months, we need to regulate it. Religious communities have struggled quite a bit with responding to all technologies and AI in particular. A dynamic that I see that I think is very dangerous is that the way that technology companies and the way that religious institutions function is totally different in terms of process, right? The way tech companies function is, we're gonna put out a product, we're gonna do it tomorrow, and it's gonna be pretty bad, and we're not gonna care. And we're gonna come out with a better product next week, and it'll be better next week, and we'll just keep saying like, this is the worst it'll ever be, and it'll get better and better and better. And they don't worry about iterating, they just kind of keep going, and eventually it gets good enough. And the response that a lot of religious institutions come up with is, we're gonna put together a committee, and we're gonna craft a statement, and it's gonna be the best statement you have ever read, and it's gonna be so beautiful, and it's gonna be like 1,000,000 words long, and it's gonna say everything you could possibly want it to say, and it's gonna be so nuanced, and it's gonna be so wonderful. And meanwhile, a year has passed, and the technology is now very different, and no one reads it, or it becomes kind of irrelevant. I see this, I don't want to name names, but like I see this across many religious denominations, that this same process unfolds, because that's the process that people are familiar with. I think it's actually important that religious organizations adopt some of the techniques that tech companies are using to say like, let's just come up with something now. We'll see what people think about it, but let's come up with like, a response to the technology. Don't do it, in 3 months from now, do it right now. It may not be perfect, but try it out and see how that goes. One denomination that I think has done this quite effectively is the Church of Latter-day Saints, as a relatively small religion that is pretty top-down and is able to kind of like, make decisions. Not every religion functions like that. Judaism is pretty decentralized. That affects the way that Judaism responds to these things as well. And so I am seeing like the kind of organizational structures of different religious communities have a profound impact on the way that they are responding to AI. There is also, I think, in many religious communities, a kind of tendency towards nuance, a kind of like treatment of nuance itself as a kind of strong value. And I don't know that nuance is always what you want when it comes to AI. Sometimes you just want like, here is a rule that people can follow, right? And those rules can be imperfect. I'll give you an example of a rule that I think is worth adopting within Judaism. I don't think AI should be used to write sermons. I don't think it should be used to write sermons at all. And I say that knowing that there are lots of rabbis who use AI to write sermons. I think it's important to kind of like say like, this is an area where you want human-to-human connection. It's not gonna have the most profound impact on the development of AI policy overall, but it defines a space of like, Here, we are going to leave AIs outside the room, at least for like an hour or two. A policy like that obviously is going to meet with some resistance, but I think it's important to adopt anyway. I see, like, really in the last like 6 months and last year, religious communities starting to get serious about this. Like, it took a couple years, like, to kind of get over the shock of ChatGPT for even any kind of response to develop. Like the conferences that like need to happen in order for religious response to develop, like, are only happening in like the last year or so. So it is slow. It's a lot slower than what I would have wanted it to be. I am hoping that it happens faster now. A lot of the work that I try to do is to create transparency about who is doing what within religious communities around AI. So there's a sense of like what is working and what is not working, so that you don't end up, reinventing the wheel or trying the same things over and over again. But it is a major problem, and I hope that we resolve it. In some ways, I feel like we're kind of too late around AI. Maybe not perfectly too late, but like it's an uphill battle at this point. But I hope that the process of trying to create better responses around AI help us for the next technologies that come down the road. The technologies which are still on the horizon, which we don't have good responses to yet, are not commercially available, but will be soon, like genetic editing of embryos, which could be commercially available in a number of years, like brain-computer interfaces, right? Computers that can talk directly to your brain, that can read your minds, that you can, or using your brain to control computers, right? This is a technology that seems like science fiction, but people are doing, clinical trials of this right now, right? Elon Musk has a company, there's other companies, right? So thinking about privacy around your own like brain, around your own thoughts, right? Important to think about now. Augmented reality, right? Right now, not everyone is walking around with like glasses that have like little displays inside or cameras, but those exist, right? And it's only a matter of time before they become available to almost everyone in the sense of like, well, you're supposed to walk around with this stuff. So AI is, I think, unfortunately, a quite late wake-up call to the need to develop new systems to respond to technologies generally. I hope we can respond to AI, and I hope we can respond to all the technologies that come after it too.
Doctor? Here's the microphone, Dr. Bruce.
Thank you. Perhaps I need AI to help me cultivate my question.
I don't think the mic.
The what?
I don't think the mic is.
Is the mic not on?
Hello? Thank you. I said perhaps I need AI to help me cultivate my question, but having had the benefit and the privilege of hearing you talk for the last 3 sessions, and perhaps I'm paraphrasing some of the other questions that have been put forward, but my question is AI a form of a false god? And if the answer is yes, it's yes. And if the answer is maybe, it's maybe. Or if it's no, it's no. But if it's no, maybe it's being perceived as a false god by humans or by humanity in the form of some kind of idol worship. And it's intriguing to me to hear the pros and the cons of AI and its different applications. But from a Torah point of view, if it is a false god or is perceived as a false god or form of idol worship, that's a direct violation of the second commandment, or by some people considered the first commandment. And secondly, the concept of idolatry is probably the most prevalent concept throughout the Torah. So I was just, before I finish up my question, I just want to refer to the person who was considered the grandfather of artificial intelligence, and his name to me is pretty interesting, Jeffrey Everest Hinton, who got the Nobel Prize for Physics fairly recently, I think in 2024, but subsequently resigned from Google over his concerns about, correct me if I'm misquoting or misunderstanding, but some of the aspects, I was going to say moral aspects, but I'll leave it as aspects of AI. So to get back to my question, is AI a form of a false god or idol worship? And if so, how do the rabbis deal with that? concept, and how do we deal with that overall?
So I have two answers for you. One answer is, sure. If it's helpful to think about it as a false god, great. I think that I've seen that language deployed, the language of AI as a kind of idolatry. I think it's powerful to the extent that it helps rally people, organize people around resistance to AI, use it. The other response is, if you're familiar with the idea that there's no such thing as an anti-war movie, right? The idea that like even movies that are ostensibly trying to show you the horrors of war end up kind of glorifying it at the same time. So using the language of idolatry, while it is powerful, also ends up reinforcing the idea that there is something religiously significant about AI. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes it might actually be more helpful to say like, no, these are just people, and they're creating a technology for, capitalistic reasons, and, we should be wary of that. So I think it's a kind of strategic question in some ways about whether the language of idolatry is useful language. So if it helps people, great. I don't have strong feelings about one way or the other. If it's the useful language, then it should be used.
Let's have one last question for tonight.
Okay. Hi there. Very thought-provoking talk. Thank you. We'll try to craft this in a coherent manner. I wanted to just offer a slightly more skeptical interpretation and get you to react to it if you could. I'm kind of in the Gary Marcus camp. I kind of feel like this is a prediction engine. LLMs have been around for a long time. I actually majored in CS 20 years ago, and so it seems like this has taken off recently because of the scale that's involved and so forth. But to me, I feel like a lot of the points you made are really fascinating, and I think that they're important insofar as the AI impacts humans and the way humans react to the AI because of the resemblance, as you described. But I feel like it's a leap to go from that to saying they have a moral agency, or that they're our child. I still think they're just a piece of technology that is just very, very easy to fall in love with because of their resemblance. So to say that they're a child to me is, in some ways you could say it's similar to fire being our child or electricity being our child. It is just a more compelling technology that is easier to seduce us, but it's still a technology in my view. So I'm just wondering if you could react to that, and what would be the counter argument to that? And if I could just get one more in, if I could really quickly. The quote that you got from Leibowitz, I was just wondering if you could say if other rabbis and priests and so forth agree with his interpretation in Judaism and Christianity, or if not. Thank you.
Yeah, so on the second one, I'm not sure. There aren't that many rabbis who engage in the question of alien life in the first place. So I was happy just to find someone who had something serious to say about it in the first place. On the first question, so just like to kind of say, so Gary Marcus, whenever you, like general pro tip on reading AI news, if you ever read a piece of AI hype, go look at Gary Marcus's blog and you will see the exact opposite. You'll be seeing someone's like, it's not as big of a deal as you think it is, right? He's been writing the same blog post for years, basically saying like, I am skeptical of this. And I take what he's saying seriously. At the same time, people are falling in love with these AI models. And regardless of what you think about his arguments on a technical level, phenomenologically, people are having responses to AI that resemble the responses that they have to human beings at this point. So you might say like, look, under the hood, it's just like, an inference machine. It's like, it's just, just imitating people. I don't know how much that kind of actually kind of technical check actually helps in the way that people experience these models in the present. I think what he's saying is particularly important in, if he's right about all of these models are kind of going to come to a crashing halt. It's not actually going to accelerate, at the pace that it's been promised that it will accelerate. But even if AI progress stopped tomorrow, I think we would still need to deal with these theological issues. I don't think those would go away. I don't think it requires us to assume that some prediction is right or another prediction is right to engage in these conversations.
So we are going to end the conversation. I'm sure there'll be other opportunities for further questions to our incredible scholar. First of all, thank you to the Goldstein family so much for your generosity, for what is clearly not just a thought-provoking conversation. This is the conversation right now. And what I took from this tonight, many things I gleaned from this evening, but the number one that I took is whether or not AI has moral agency. I feel certain that we do. And so as AI evolves, I pray that we evolve in the ways that we hold ourselves accountable, responsible, ethical, empathetic, spiritual, et cetera, et cetera. So may we continue to evolve so that we do have a say in the moral agency of the AI we encounter day after day. So thank you so very much. Such a pleasure to have you. I didn't want to say it. I didn't know.
We're in
Okay.
chapel. I'm gonna take him out here, so come join us.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Are you like a big black mirror junkie? Like what? Or did you get over it?
I followed it for the first season
Yeah.
too, and then it's